Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is FrancisP, and I'm a recovery coach and personal development coach based outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And today I wanted to make a video about coping skills. And it's something that I talk a lot about specifically with my recovery coaching clients is how do we cope with different challenges, different stressors, different things that come up in life in a healthy way. And for people that are watching that are maybe into personal development, how do we cope with different challenges, barriers, obstacles, things that come up during your progress of achieving your goal as well. And I want to go through like a spectrum of coping skills from boredom, something on a scale of 1 to 10 of, stress that you're coping with, maybe a 2 or 3, to really bad news, then maybe from an 8 to a 10 of things that you're coping with. And we're going to go through different types of coping skills, like a toolbox of coping skills. And there's loads of lists online of different things that you can do to cope, and I would encourage you to reference them. But what I really want to get into is thinking about the different types of coping skills and when you might apply them and what kind of situations. And I think the more that you understand like the toolbox of coping, the more that you have ideas of different things that you can try, different tools that you can use, and maybe one's not working in this situation, try something else. The deeper the understanding, the more second nature it becomes, the better you're going to be at coping, which then increase your resiliency, your ability to bounce back from obstacles and challenges, and your just ability to, continue to pursue your goals in spite of things that may arise. So let's start. So first I want to go through a definition of what is a coping skill. And this says the methods a person uses to deal with stressful situations. These may help a person face a situation, take action, and be flexible and persistent in solving problems. And I got this definition from the National Cancer Institute. And when I was looking at different definitions for a coping skill, I thought of, when I saw the NCI, I was thinking, what a thing to cope with, like a potential cancer diagnosis, whether you're a person in recovery or a person working on your personal development, like getting a difficult health diagnosis can definitely be a challenge that, you're going to have to cope with emotionally, mentally, problem solving. You're going to be using a whole array of different tools in your toolbox to deal with, as well as support, all these different things that we're going to go through. So I really thought that was, a challenging example, but an appropriate example of something that somebody may be coping with. So we're going to go through the different types of coping skills. And we're going to start with first problem solving coping skills. So problem focused coping, it says, involves handling stress by facing it head on and taking action to resolve the underlying cause. So some problems, some challenges that you have, it's how can I work my way through this, eliminate the problem itself, eliminate the stressor itself, and that way, I can solve the issue that way. I'm going to go through some different examples of problems, and we're going to look at these different types of coping skills and see how they would apply as well. So next would be emotion-focused coping. So emotion-focused coping involves regulating your feelings and emotional response to the problem instead of addressing the problem. Some problems I can't really fix, suppose, right away. It's something maybe it's going to take some time to address, but how can I cope in the meantime? And just, to use the cancer diagnosis, problem solving, maybe that's when I'm calling, making appointments with doctors, I'm going getting scans, I'm getting treatments, I'm trying to solve the problem itself. My emotion-based coping was, how do I emotionally feel about this? How do I practice self-compassion for myself? How do I practice my self-care? These different things. How do I emotionally regulate any challenge, distress, when they arise? This part of the coping. Next would be meaning-focused coping. So meaning-focused coping is, in its essence, this is appraisal-based coping in which the person draws on his or her beliefs, examples of religious, spiritual beliefs about justice and values, mattering, and existential goals. Examples, purpose in life or guiding principles to motivate and sustain coping and well-being during a difficult time. And, I pulled this definition offline and from this book, The Case for Positive Emotions and the Stress Process, Anxiety, Stress, and Coping. And sometimes the best we can do is make meaning. And I think for examples of, loss and different things like that in life, I can't solve the problem. And we're going to get into this, but how can I make meaning from it? And sometimes that's the best that we can do, along with emotion-based coping or social support. So next we have social coping, and that's support seeking, in which an individual reduces stress by seeking emotional or instrumental support from their community. So I'm going to kind of go back to just a review. So we have the problem solving, emotion based coping, the meaning making coping, meaning focused, as well as support and social coping. And there are other different coping types out there, and doing research and things for this video. I thought that these really were for the main ones, but there's many different ideas and philosophies and, thoughts on how we can cope with different situations that arise. So when I talked about, I think I mentioned this earlier on speaking the video, this spectrum of things that we're coping with, from boredom to something like bad news, like getting grief, loss, whether it's losing grieving relationship, and a job, losing a person, a loved one, these different things that may arise. So in this spectrum that I'm talking about, like depending on what it is you're dealing with, how I'm going to cope may look different. If I'm just bored, maybe that's when I'm going to listen to music, watch TV show, go for a walk. I'm going to do these things. I can use emotional-based coping, think about why I'm bored, think about, problem solve, figure out other things I can do, okay? Now, if I'm dealing with different kind of stressors, maybe going for a walk isn't going to cut it. Maybe I need to reach out to somebody and use my social support. Maybe I really need to process something mentally and I'm using my emotional based coping. Maybe it's something I can problem solve and I'm working on doing that, all the way out to the grief and loss. Which maybe you can't really problem solve, but I can make meaning out of it, or I can use emotional based coping, use my support system. So now I want to go through some different example challenges, as I'm calling them, things that can arise that can throw you through a loop, and that how do we cope with them in a healthy way. And to bring this back to recovery, which I can literally relate anything to recovery. You can talk about any kind of conversation or topic, and I can relate it to recovery. But specifically with recovery clients, when you have a lack of ability to cope with something, that's when you're going to reach for what you traditionally cope with. And maybe for people that don't consider themselves in recovery, but when you get bad news or you have stress, maybe you reach for a drink or, different things like that. That can still show you this is how you cope. Maybe it's not the level to rise as we're in any kind of treatment or anything like that, but this is a coping skill that you've developed. So what are some other ways that I can cope? So we're going to start at the lower end of the spectrum, something like boredom, which it's interesting when I ask different recovery clients, their different triggers. Rarely do people usually throw out boredom. If I suggest it, they're like, oh my God, yeah, being bored. Literally, if it's like a Friday night, Saturday night, and you're sitting at home and you're kind of bored, what are you going to do? You're going to reach for alcohol, maybe something harder, go out with your friends, party, to achieve, not being bored anymore. And I could do a whole entire video on that and why I think people feel that way, why it's exciting if you're, using a substance, it's a whole cultural thing, but I digress. I'll get back to, for how do we cope in a healthy way with being bored. So something like having a schedule, if I know what it is I could be or should be doing at a different time, if I'm thinking like currently, let's see, this is a Sunday afternoon, it's in the morning, I'm currently filming a video, but also need to do some grocery shopping today, get the trash and recycles together, all these different things. There's things I could be doing. So if I was sitting here bored and going, oh, I have nothing to do, really I know in my head the different lists of tasks that I could be doing. So I could do outstanding chores or tasks, understanding what is my different things I might be doing on a Sunday, or it could be out at a park. It's, a nice day outside, but that's the thing, understanding my schedules, understanding where my free time is. Now I can have the choice. Okay, it is this time on a Sunday. What are my different options? What are different things I could do? Work on a project. For me, making these YouTube videos about coping is kind of working on a project. Fun activities, like going on a hike, these different things are fun. Let's see, emotional focus coping. So I'm working on coping on boredom, asking myself, why am I bored? So when I started asking myself about being bored, like I literally went through all these different processes myself. A lot of times I figured out there was other things I could do. I could vacuum. I was thinking earlier I could probably use vacuum today. there's really honestly usually no reason to be bored. There's probably different things that you could be doing that could be beneficial and working towards your goals. So if you're saying I feel restless, now that's different. If I'm having like restless energy, maybe I'll go for a hike or I'll do something physical to work on that restless energy. Ask, why am I bored? Why do I feel the need to be active? Maybe it's that I really haven't done that much physical activity today. I've been kind of sitting around, if that was the case. And so that's why I'm kind of feeling this restless energy need to be active. So this is kind of going through your own emotional process and asking yourself. This is a kind of higher level coping, right? Than just the simple problem solving, but trying to look at different tools in my toolbox. Asking myself what's wrong with just relaxing and resting. Suppose I decided, you know what, today actually I will go grocery shopping, but then I'm just going to relax kind of the rest of the day, enjoy my Sunday. I've had a really busy week, so I'm just going to kind of rest my central nervous system and have a great day that way. That would be fine. And having that deep understanding of what my schedule looks like, how my other coping looks, the different parts of my life, the building blocks of my life helps me make these decisions with confidence to where I could take a day off and relax, which kind of I did that yesterday, just to rest my body, rest my mind, these different things, and I understand where I'm putting out my efforts in other areas, my lifestyle balance. Asking myself for meaning making. What can I gain from this? How does this benefit me? So yesterday, you could say I was bored. I didn't do a lot of. I did some physical activity and all, but I recognized that my body actually was telling me I needed to take a little break. And although I would have liked to do more physical exertion yesterday, I got in some good exercise. But I feel that it benefits me in the long term through sustainability. So that's how taking a day off, or let's see, how can vacuuming benefit me? How can go to the grocery store benefit me? How does being bored benefit me? Being bored maybe tells you there's things that you should be doing. Let's say I could talk to a support about feeling bored. And this is just the lower end of the coping spectrum. And if you're asking yourself, wow, we're really going through this much different coping ideas for boredom, think about, like I said, for people in recovery, literally being bored can be enough to go out and, get some heroin, get some crack, or for somebody alcohol, drinking alcohol, just because it's a Friday night or it's a Tuesday afternoon and I'm off work, might as well day drink, like literally, this is how deep this stuff does get. So to me, it's really valuable to go through something as simple as boredom to cope with. Next, we'll go through a disagreement with a partner. And here's a really good one. I'm not sure how many people, if you're watching, you're in relationships, if you've been in relationships, but, having a fight or argument, disagreement with a partner, how do you cope with that? And for different people, this can be very emotionally disturbing. It's very upsetting, having a disagreement and can really throw them through a loop and maybe either can just derail your progress towards a goal, can derail your relationship, or lead to substance use. So let's think about the problem solving tool. So if I was to try and problem solve the disagreement, I can think about effectively communicating. Like, how could I have said things in a different way, maybe to de-escalate the situation or not let it to get to that point? Did I really communicate my point well? Was I, being assertive, aggressive, passive aggressive, these different things? Was I compromising? Is there a way I can alter my approach or offer some solutions? Like, here's, or explain things like coming from a place of empathy. I call it an appeal to empathy. Like, this is how I'm feeling about the situation, even if you may not agree with me on, my perception of it. This is the way I'm feeling. Is there a way that we can reach some kind of compromise so we both feel better? And I think that if you're in a relationship with somebody who, values your input, values your feelings, I think the ability to work through these in a healthy way. I mean, I have currently the one of the healthiest relationships, and not the healthiest I've had, an ability to communicate with anyone in my life, and learning how to effectively explain how you're feeling inside is a difficult and challenging skill, but can help you resolve issues with your partner incredibly. I have yet to have any kind of like argument in 3 years. So to me, that's wonderful to not have a fight, with your partner in 3 years. It's terrific. But so how can I, effectively communicate and compromise? How can I hold the other person's feelings and opinions, in esteem, and that way I be more willing to compromise on my end. Asking myself, is this something I can change? Is this something I can compromise on? Is this something I can use acceptance with? Is this really that important? I find a lot of things in relationships, you have to ask yourself, is this something that, really means that much to where it's getting to this level, where I'm feeling that emotionally upset about it? And sometimes I think people can make more out of situations than it really needs to be. It's really not that deep. And ask yourself, if you're at the point where you're having a disagreement with the person over this, like, is this something that I want to make or break my relationship? If that's not the case, then is this something I can use acceptance with or adjust my approach with? So I'll use an example. Suppose you're with a partner that doesn't really clean up after themselves, and you've asked and you've talked about it and you've shared why it's important to you, and your partner still does not clean up after themselves. So you can ask yourself, is this something that I can change in them? Okay, so far I have not been able to. Is this something I can use acceptance with and just accept that this is kind of an aspect of them, or something that they're not really interested in, that they don't see the value in? Is this something that I can accept and just kind of pick up the slack or what have you on my end? Is this really that important to me to where I'm willing to keep on getting upset and having issues over and over again in the relationship? So really ask yourself, is the relationship worth cleaning up over? If, or not. But these are really deep questions you have to ask yourself. And otherwise, you're going to keep coming back to the same point over and over again, getting stressed over and over again. Every time asking yourself, why can't I get them to clean up after themselves? And here you are years and years later. And literally, as I'm saying this, I imagine you've thought of situations, different stuff that this happens literally for years and years. And resentments build up between people. I can think of people I know in relationships exactly like that. And I think that you need to ask yourself, what this means to you and what the relationship means to you, and kind of, weigh that balance. Making meaning, saying, I like having a partner with differing views. We have different strengths. Maybe they're not so great at cleaning up after themselves, but they're extremely thoughtful. They're extremely kind. They're extremely generous. They care about, they treat your children very well, pets, what have you. There's different things about the person. Maybe they're not so organized, but they have other strengths. Okay. And recognizing maybe you don't want someone exactly like you that is your same exact strengths, maybe your same exact, weak areas as well, that by having people that kind of balance each other out, that you can fill these different areas. So that'd be an example of meaning focused coping. For social support, maybe you talk to a support like a loved one about the situation, discuss with a therapist, etc. So maybe you're talking to a in-law about it. Oh, they never clean up after themselves. Oh, they've been like that since we were kids. Their room was always the dirtiest. And you're like, okay, I'm hearing that literally this has been like this forever, and I'm thinking I can change this. That's when acceptance seems to be, kind of a way to go. See, I can kind of tie all this different stuff together. So let's, move on to something a bit more stressful. So how about getting laid off for losing a job? How do we cope with something like that? So suppose, suddenly you find out you've been laid off or you've been let go. How do I problem solve? And for me, it's asking myself, do I want to jump into the emotional coping part of this or the problem solving? And personally, for me, being laid off, like I need kind of a day or two to work on the emotion and meaning based coping before I can jump into the problem solving. I've just discovered that I need to take a little bit of time, says emotional focus coping, to mentally process, use some acceptance, do something to take my mind off it. If I just immediately jump into problem solving and start updating my resume, applying for jobs, at the end of that, time, or at the end of that day, sometimes because I haven't given myself that time to decompress, I'm actually a bit more stressed. Because suppose you're sitting there really thinking and you're filling out these different things. That's using your central nervous system. You're using effort and energy, using mental processing power, and you're while coping on top of that, you're going to experience that other side, that kind of burnout on the other side of it. So if I can kind of take a pause, take a breather, practice some self-compassion, say, this is a challenging situation here. It's okay to take a breath, give myself a hug, let myself know it's going to be okay. We're going to cope. We're going to get through this. We know our problem solving skills are there. We're going to manage, but right now I just need to breathe. Sometimes that can be super helpful. Use my emotion focused coping skills, my meaning focused. Maybe this will lead to something better. Maybe this actually an opportunity. One door opens, another one door closes, another door opens, whatever the saying. But like maybe I can turn this into something. I try and fall upward. So how can I use this to benefit me? Use my social support. Maybe I'm calling somebody as soon as I'm getting in the car before I even leave the parking lot. Like, hey, I'm calling my partner. Like, hey, I just got let go from work. They closed down, they laid off a bunch of people, what have you. Imagine there's a lot of industries. Look at different, especially in the tech industry, a lot of people that, had these great jobs, and all of a sudden you're banking on this, and this is your income, and boom. So I imagine all of these people probably, when they found out the news, I imagine they wanted to pick up their phone or go online and reach out to somebody. This is how we cope. Then they're thinking about different organizations that they can try and work for. Like, this is the process. But kind of if I'm reaching for my problem solving immediately, reaching for my social support immediately, reaching for making meaning, like, it's okay. That company kind of sucked anyway. We're going to move on to bigger and better things, using my emotional coping, just acceptance, like, this is rough. I'm going to give myself a hug and take a breath here, self-compassion, but reaching for the different tools in my toolbox. We're going to keep moving to more difficult coping skills. So let's talk about loss, losing a friend or a loved one. And I apologize if this is triggering for people, but, these are the things that come up. And imagine if I didn't talk about coping with difficult things. I mean, I started off with a definition talking about cancer, but like, I'm not going to try and sugarcoat things or act like, these aren't the things that people cope with, because especially when it comes to, substance use treatment, like coping with loss, coping with breaking up relationship, coping with losing loved ones, these are things that can make or break somebody's recovery. People have literally asked me, I've had clients ask me, how do people have like 5 or 6 years in recovery and then they relapse because they lose somebody? And I say, well, it's, partially just not having the ability to cope with these different things. And there's really difficult things to cope with, but and every time I cope with something difficult, it feels like I'm achieving some new level of coping. There's always something new to come along. And I've experienced lots of loss and grief in my recovery, at various early stages, middle stages, long stages in recovery, and how I get through it without using my coping skills, just reaching in my toolbox. For problem solving, maybe it's making arrangements and thinking about a eulogy, these different things. Sometimes you're literally so busy early on. Maybe if you're dealing with a hospital or anything like that, if the person's in the hospital before they pass, and you're talking to these different people and you're making plans that you don't have the time to process, or the person passes and you're working on insurance things or these different stuff. That's, you're so busy problem solving that's kind of how you're coping early on. Then maybe you're using some emotional based coping, taking some time to mentally process, practicing gratitude for having known the person. Now, this is like a higher level concept, but something that I really have to do myself, because I'd ask myself this philosophy, as I say things are, instead of just focusing on that one part of their entire lifespan, how they passed, or focusing on their passing, instead look at the entire picture. I kind of have to zoom out a lot and look at the larger picture and say, I got to know this person for this whole length of time, and be glad that I got to know them, instead of just hyper focusing on that ending. Practice acceptance, recognizing, they talk, if the stages of grief, accepting kind of you're moving through that. There's the bargaining, that maybe it's not them, maybe they're misidentified. I've literally gone through all these things mentally, and being able to work through them to get to that acceptance, to get to where having that gratitude, read books on different grief, practice your self-care, these different things. It's a challenge. And unfortunately, but the more I've gone through this, the better I get at the process of it, because it's going to come up. We, if as long as you're here as a human being on this earth, caring about other people and loving other people, until you pass, other people are going to pass before you, and being able to work through that in a healthy way. And I know people that really, really struggle every time they lose someone, and I really worry for them. And being able to work through this process and develop these skills, it's it hurts, but it's necessary in life, because the other option is just isolating and not letting yourself care about people, or to let it, sweep you off your feet every time. So how can we work on this, so that when these things do arise, we can cope with them in a healthy way, making meaning from it, using spirituality, religion, a secular celebration of life. And when they, in the previous slide, and actually I'm going to go back to it about the meaning making, when they said about meaning focused coping is in essence appraisal based coping, in which the person draws on his or her beliefs, like religious, spiritual, or beliefs about justice. I think especially for the coping with loss, spirituality, religion can be beneficial. Beliefs about justice wouldn't really apply in that situation. But using your values could be that. For values, when it comes to loss, that would be something like gratitude, that I value the experience, that I value the connection, and that these are the things that make life worth living. So I can use my spiritual values, my religious values, and existential goals, purpose in life, meeting and being around other people, guiding principles, being helpful, being kind, connectivity, to motivate and sustain coping and well-being during a difficult time. And I mean, I could do entire videos, especially on dealing with loss. And unfortunately, like I said, it's something that I've had a lot of experience with. But, and I'd said like celebration of life, being able to celebrate the person's life, and having known them, and kind of puts a more positive spin on it than being hyper focused on the loss itself. And this is how I've, kind of managed with the losses that I've gone through. And I think that it can be beneficial, because like I said, a lot of people in recovery may relapse over something like a loss. So how do we make meaning from it? How do we process and work on it emotionally? How do we use our social support? Talk to a support. Maybe it's a sponsor, maybe it's your family. Talk to common friends and family. Seek a grief support group, counseling, etc. And the grief support groups are tremendous. And God bless, the people that run these groups and grief counselors. It's something that I couldn't do full time, but it's so beneficial to be able to work through this with other people. And a lot of times, if it's your first time losing someone, you can, really feel alone in this. And to have other people that are around you that can help guide you through this process, I can't, overstate how beneficial that can be. And personally, even sometimes after a loss, I've gone and speaking to counselors and different things just to kind of process my thoughts and feelings about it. It's made me think about my spirituality, these different things through loss, and I'll move on, but that's something that on the coping spectrum, for me at least, I think is a definite high level one to cope with, and can derail a lot of people's progress, whether it's just in personal development or in recovery. And talking about different coping skills to check out. So for problem solving, look into boundary setting, because sometimes, especially when it comes to relationships, jobs, these different things, how to set appropriate boundaries and communicate them effectively can really help problem solve some of these issues. How to manage your time. Doing cost benefit analysis, like I was saying about whether it's a relationship or a job, when I'm problem solving, like how deep is this for me, or is this something that's worthwhile for me? Maybe it actually be beneficial for me to try something different. work on my organizational skills. By being more organized and being able to break down the problem into smaller pieces, maybe I can accomplish my goals better to better problem solve. Let's see. For emotional focused coping, mindfulness is really important, because in the moment when you're being swept up by your emotions, being able to be mindful and kind of reground yourself and recenter yourself can help you to reach for the coping skill in the first place, instead of kind of what your habitual or kind of pre-programmed path might be, whether it's alcohol or something else. Check out unconditional acceptance, and I have videos on this as well. But the unconditional self-acceptance, life acceptance, other acceptance, that can be very helpful in relationships, with loss or yourself. Cognitive behavioral therapy, rational behavioral therapy. Albert Ellis, who he pioneered the unconditional acceptance. But these are different things to check out, to Google online. Just like I said, there's tons of lists of coping skills out there. For meaning focused coping, cognitive reframing. That's a term for being able to take a situation and alter your perception of it in your mind in order to process it or deal with it in a healthy way. So sometimes saying, maybe this, if it's loss of a job, making meaning is okay. Actually, this is going to kind of springboard me into something different, or I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to try these different outlets. I'm going to pursue a different career. Maybe I want to go back to school. How can I make meaning from this? How can I make this mean something for me based on my values, my goals, things I'm working on? Social coping, looking at different support groups. For whatever you're going through, odds are there's a support group, whether it's for people with cancer diagnoses, people who've lost loved ones, whatever it is, there's usually a support group. Obviously, substance use and recovery, there's support groups out there, counselors, therapists, psychiatrists, all these different things. There's a abundant list of coping skills out there. The key is to use them when you're struggling. Like I said, like when you're going through the thing, like in the moment, that's when you need to reach for your coping skill. We can talk about them and think about them and kind of plan ahead, even role play for these different things. When X, Y, or Z happens, here's how I'm going to cope. Here's what I'm going to do. But in the moment, using it, that's where the real work is done. You can proactively work on your emotional, meaning-focused coping skills through reading about different concepts and philosophies and developing your values. So the more I understand my values, my beliefs, my philosophies, the easier it'll be to work on that acceptance, to work on that meaning making, to work on cognitive reframing, because I understand how I feel about myself, the world, different things that arise. I have these beliefs. Sometimes it's these things that come up that make you figure out what it is you actually believe. And it's okay to not really understand some of your beliefs and values. By working on it and reading these things and gaining knowledge. And suppose you read something, you realize, okay, I don't actually vibe with this. I don't really agree with this. Good. Then read something else. Check out something else to feel what feels right for you. What do you vibe with? That's how you can figure out your values, your beliefs, your philosophies. Because like I said, I don't need everybody else in the world to think like me or to be like me. It's actually more beneficial. So I encourage everybody to find your beliefs, find your philosophies, find your guiding principles. The more different people we have working on this and pursuing this, the more people that are able to cope, that are able to build resiliency. Like I literally imagine this stuff rippling outward, by making these videos. And there's loads of other videos on coping skills, but the more just as society and as people, we can learn how to work through these things and communicate and get through this stuff together, I think the better off we're going to be. It doesn't even need to agree with my philosophy or beliefs on it, just putting that out there of, being able to think about these things and, work on our mindfulness and different things like that. Use our problem solving skills to change the circumstances. And there's a great book, Gerard Egan, it's called The Skilled Helper, and it talks about recognizing, your opportunities and building your problem solving and building that capacity for self-efficacy, your belief in yourself that I can change a situation, I can work through things, and all this, I talk about the different building blocks and how this all fits together. This is coping is just one part of the equation, but it's a huge part of it. And how do we deal with these different setbacks? So lastly, as always, thank you. And, I make these videos to try and spread this information because I truly believe in this stuff. And, everybody that I've worked for and different clients, they say they see my level of passion because I'm a true believer in this. I experience all these different things myself. I've put these different tools and things into practice in my own life. I feel the change, I've seen it work, and I live, eat, and breathe this stuff, so I get excited, when I was putting this presentation together, just being able to think about what are the different parts of coping, what are the different things that I think that are beneficial to understand, from the problem solving to how do I manage it emotionally, how do I make meaning from it, how do I lean on my support systems, to, checking out lists of different things that you can do to cope. But for the recovery clients, for personal development clients, I think everybody can benefit from this. And as always, also, if you're interested in personal coaching, private, confidential coaching, you can check out my website or email me, premiumpersonaldevelopment.com. And I think that the more we can get this different stuff out there, the more we can all benefit. And imagine all of us working towards achieving our goals and living our best lives and finding out our potential, like it sounds like some utopian dream to me, but really I think this, it's not rocket science, hopefully I made this video in an explainable, understandable, relatable way that can benefit you as well. All right. Thank you. Have a great day.